He did not moan. He just lay there and dripped. Every day since the beginning of January, the sheets beneath him were changed 6 times a day. The royal embalmers, who were kept in the neighboring wing by order of the Queen Mother in case of sudden death, whispered, "He is already dead. It is the shell that is rotting." Ferdinand IV, King of Castile and Leon, the last descendant of the old branch, began to leak fluid on January 5th, immediately after Epiphany. In a report by the monk Alberico, a witness to the evening service, it is said, "During the anointing, His Majesty began to sweat, but not with sweat, but with a thick, grayish substance that gave off a foul odor. The doctors first decided it was a purulent abscess. They washed it and applied a bandage with honey and rosemary, but the next morning it slipped off. The body became slippery, as if oiled from the inside. Before that, he had hardly complained. After falling from a horse in December, he limped, complained of itching in his groin, and at times could not feel his fingers. Chamberlain Sanchez said, he said it felt like ants were crawling under his skin. The doctors prescribed bloodletting, sage tea, and a strict fast, but a week after the fall, the first smell appeared. It was not immediately recognizable. It was not blood or sweat, but something warm and sour, like sour wine. After that, the maids refused to sleep in the monarch's room. They were replaced by boys from a monastery school. By the end of January, the king was hardly eating. His food was ground into a paste, diluted with milk, and served in a clay spoon. But he hardly opened his mouth. His lips were cracked. Saliva dripped down his chin. The court surgeon de Rivera wrote, "The condition of the skin is sluggish. There is a coating in the mouth, and the temperature is normal, but there is noticeable swelling in the lower abdomen, accompanied by evaporation from the skin." He emphasized, "Not from the wound, from the skin." This did not fit into the understanding of medicine at the time. A doctor from Salamanca tried to use a vaporization method. Hot coals soaked in resin and vinegar were brought into the room. Bags of myrrh were hung over the body, but the stench intensified. The servants who kept night watch complained of headaches, rashes, and nausea. The valet submitted a request for transfer. He was replaced by a young man who threw himself into the monastery garden 3 days later. The Queen Mother, Doña Isabel, visited her son only once. She stayed in his chambers for 7 minutes, after which she ordered, "Do not let any women in. Do not allow priests to touch his body without gloves." Rumors circulated that she suspected poisoning. A pharmacist from Toledo was secretly summoned, who delivered his verdict. "It is not poison. It is inside. It is unnatural." In the second week of February, an ulcer opened in the groin area. The skin around it turned black, like a burn. When changing the bandage, one of Dr. Lopez's students saw something white and translucent, like a larva, come out of the ulcer. He threw the bandage into the fire. Later, it burned with a crackle. The doctors did not comment. The pharmacist's diary contains the following line: "I saw movement under the skin, not pulsation. Something was writhing. Gradually, access to the body was restricted. Only 3 people were allowed into the room: the chamberlain, a monk sworn to silence, and the surgeon himself. Priests were called to hear his confession, but each time they returned without performing the rite. One said, 'He can't hear.' Another said, 'He's looking, but not at me.' One chaplain disappeared. Later, his body was found in a mine behind the monastery. There was a dark stripe on his forehead. The official version was suicide due to spiritual weakness. Ferdinand's body began to lose its shape. A hollow formed in the lower abdomen. The rib cage became concave. His left leg was swollen and turning purple. When touched, there was fluid under the skin. Soon, one of his legs turned black. His fingers became crispy, like crackers, but his heart was still beating. His eyes sometimes opened. Sometimes he stared at a single point, an icon of the Virgin Mary attached to the ceiling. On the night of March 6th, one of the monks cleaning the bed said, "He spoke." The king's tongue was swollen, his lips were black, and his mouth did not move. But according to the monk, someone pronounced his name. No one else confirmed this. That same evening, a clot came out of the groin ulcer, pinkish gray like fat. It moved, they burned it. But the next morning, white threads were found in his urine. One of the doctors called them worms, another called them a sign of purification. The third remained silent. And by mid-March, his body was at a steady temperature, hot at the bottom, cold at the top. New ulcers appeared on his chest, between his shoulder blades, on his forehead. Some oozed a yellow liquid. When the bandages were changed, the skin peeled away from the flesh. One of the servants wrote, "When I touched it, there was nothing under my finger. The skin was like a film on milk." Another said, "He is not a man, he is a shell. He is rotting alive." And yet no one dared to admit that the king was dying. The royal chancellor sought to convene the council, but Cardinal Rodrigo insisted, "He is repentant. He does not need a trial. He himself is a sign." Some believed that the illness was a punishment. Others believed it was the evil eye. Rumors of a conspiracy began to spread. The names of Enrique's cousin, the widowed Infanta, and even the Bishop of Navarre were mentioned. Threatening notes began to appear in his chambers. "If he dies, you will burn. The king is dead. The devil is in his body." The notes were found under the door in the morning. The doctors began to sleep in another wing. The servants asked for extra pay for night duty. One demanded to be allowed to go home until Holy Week. He disappeared. By the end of March, Ferdinand was not eating, drinking, or moving. But he was not dying. His pulse was weak. His groin was very hot. It was ulcerated and blackening. A liquid with dark pus was oozing from it. One of the doctors secretly cut off a piece of tissue and sent it to Seville for analysis. The answer came a week later. The structure is disintegrating. This is not inflammation, it is decomposition. But as long as the crown was on his head, he was king. When a second ulcer opened on the inside of his thigh, the skin split along the line of the blood vessels, thin and stretched like parchment. A grayish-yellow liquid with streaks flowed from the tear. Chamberlain Deloso ordered that no doctors be called. By that time, there were already at least 4 servants in the king's chambers complaining of skin rashes, headaches, and a metallic taste in their mouths. One of them, an elderly chaplain, was found dead by the window, with a crucifix in his hand and blood coming from his ears. His coffin was not opened. According to rumors, the body had swollen overnight. From the end of February, access to the chambers was restricted. The guards were replaced with those who did not know what had happened in January. The new guards were allowed to wear oil bandages over their faces and not come closer than 3 steps. The bedding was taken out through a service door, burned in the monastery furnace, and the ashes were buried outside the garden. From a letter by the monk Alberto di Tarco, I saw the bandage removed from His Majesty's foot, thrown into the fireplace, and the flames flared up as if from pitch. The smell lingered until evening. My brother stopped speaking after that. The servants who entered the bedroom remained silent. They were not allowed to mention anything about the monarch's physical condition. Any mention of pain, fluid, smell, or ulcers was considered a crime against the throne. One of the pages, a boy from Navarre, couldn't bear it and ran away to the monastery garden, where he threw himself into hysterics and repeated, "He lies there rotting like a fish in the sun." He was found the next day, hanged. Rumors intensified. Meanwhile, the body continued to decompose. The king did not speak, did not move, did not eat. His mouth remained half open, his lips black and cracked, his tongue swollen. From the description of the apothecary Balthazar, it seems that he is breathing through his skin. The air enters and exits not through his mouth, but through cracks and ulcers saturated with fluid. The king's internal organs were no longer functioning. Any liquid introduced into his mouth or nose flowed out through his groin. along with murky mucus and flecks of pus. The doctors were divided. Some insisted on an autopsy, others on continuous purification rituals. No one mentioned the word death. The Archbishop of Toledo wrote in a private letter, "If we acknowledge death before the cessation of breathing, we acknowledge the victory of the devil." It was decided to continue the procedures, smearing with honey, rubbing with vinegar, fumigating with incense, drops of myrrh, prayers in the old language. In March, the monarch began to make sounds, not words, wheezes, as if air were passing through wet fur. Sometimes it sounded like a cough, sometimes like a guttural cry. When one of the brothers of mercy tried to read a prayer over him, the king let out a sharp cry, and a white clot flew out of his mouth and hit the icon. It was scraped off with a knife. Cardinal Lorenzo ordered the cloth with the traces on it to be burned immediately. That same evening, he disappeared. His room was occupied without permission. The dampness in the bedroom increased. The walls began to get wet, and mold formed under the bed. The chamberlain wrote, "The stone on which the bed stands is covered with slime, although there is no water in the room." In the morning, one of the nuns slipped and broke her neck. Her body was not removed until evening. No one wanted to go in. At night, sounds could be heard in the corridors. Those on duty at the door claimed to hear splashing, as if someone were slapping water. Juan de Fado, a servant, left a note. When I approached the chambers, I felt as if the ground beneath my feet was soft, as if it were alive. Then there was a smell, not of rot, but like blood from a tooth. I cannot describe it. A day later, he was found dead in the monastery library. There was a pool of slime on the floor. April began with a new ulcer on his stomach. For the first time, his temperature rose above 40 degrees. The king lay motionless, but his forehead was covered with sweat, and steam rose from the pillow beneath him. The apothecary noted, "The steam is not hot, it is rotten. It does not burn, but settles on the skin like mold." On the same day, one of the monks saw an insect come out of Charles's ear. He tried to catch it, but the creature disappeared into a crack in the stone. The next morning, 2 dead pigeons were found in the corridor. The king's bed was changed for the 3rd time in a month. Once again, the lower layer of skin was found to be decomposing. Underneath it was a soft, shapeless mess. One of the physicians tried to palpate it and felt something moving under the skin. He said, "I thought it was the intestines, but it didn't move like an organ. It was as if it was crawling toward my hand." Rumors spread. People said, "He's dead, but he won't die. He's being punished. He was born cursed." At the markets, they discussed that the king's mother was a witch, that his blood was impure, that he ate rats, that his body would not accept death. The scribe de Arevalo wrote, "I walked along the square. Children were drawing a crown and a worm on the walls. No one was laughing. Everyone was praying, but they didn't know whether it was for him or against him." At the end of April, the body began to make noises. One of the soldiers heard what sounded like someone laughing inside. Another swore that he saw the bed swaying without the king moving. A third lost consciousness. The doctors stopped touching him. They placed soaked rags on him with tongs. They breathed through woolen scarves. No one uttered the word death. From the last report of the guard, when we changed the bandage on his groin, it stuck. We pulled, but a piece of fabric tore off with the skin. Underneath, there was nothing. No pus, no blood. Air, like in a rag, and movement. Then it started to flow. It stank immediately. One of the servants screamed and ran away. By May, the king's room was a quarantine zone. Entry was by order only. Anyone who entered without permission was arrested. Even the cardinals stood at the doors and prayed through a cloth. No one spoke loudly. No one knew if he was alive. No one wanted to know. But the body was breathing. In the spring, the chambers became unbearable. The sheets had to be changed 3 times a day. They became damp, dark, and heavy with fluid. The windows were boarded up to prevent drafts. but the air remained stagnant, sticky, and smelled of rot. The walls were covered with condensation. The floors were scrubbed with vinegar and doused with a solution of myrrh, but the smell would not go away. In early March, the court physician von Klamm wrote, "The smell has changed. It is not just rotten, it is alive. It clings to clothing and lingers in the throat. The eyes water. Spots appeared on the skin." Chamberlain de Solano, who accompanied the doctor, left the palace on the same day. He was later questioned and said, "I saw something moving under the king's skin. It didn't look like worms. It was pulsating." He was sent to the monastery of San Geronimo. The servants refused to enter the chambers. Trays were left outside the door. The food was untouched. The scribes wrote, "The sovereign remains in seclusion and bed." But those who were allowed into the chambers saw that the body lay like a deflated wineskin. His chest had fallen, his stomach had sunk inward, and his groin was swollen, as if a bowl of snakes were hiding beneath it. At the end of March, ulcers began to appear on the inner thighs. One of them burst when the bandage was changed, and a clot came out, according to the surgeon's description, like a bag of pale larvae. Only inside there was a slime similar to pus, but with fibers. He tried to sew up the wound, but the needle would not stay in the skin. The tissue tore. Then the bandage was simply pressed down on both sides with boards wrapped in cloth. A medical council gathered again. It was suggested that a decoction of rue be administered through the nose to reduce the smell. The embalmers refused to come closer, citing church regulations. Cardinal Oviedo insisted, "He is alive, therefore he is still anointed." No one objected, even when black smoke began to rise from under the bed. At night, the maids heard noises, a creaking sound, as if someone were moving in the corner, whispering, like breathing through wet cloth. One of the nuns on duty left the convent without permission. She was found in a field, barefoot, with her habit torn. She said, "He's calling, but the voice isn't coming from his mouth. He's in the walls." In early April, the body began to secrete a black liquid. It seeped through the mattress. When it was lifted, dark mold remained on the floor. They tried to scrape it off with salt, to no avail. The floor was replaced with boards, burned from the inside. A week later, flies began to emerge from under the new boards. By that time, the groin had turned into a blurred hole. Chamberlain Hoff described it as formless, only moisture, smell, and tremors, like the surface of a quagmire. The doctors did not examine the groin directly. They put bandages on top, hoping for a miracle. Once, in the early morning, when Brother Norbert was changing the bandage, an intestine fell out of the open crack. It was gray-yellow and covered with spots. They grabbed it with forceps and tried to push it back in, but to no avail. They had to call a tailor to alter the ceremonial robes so that the groin was covered with fabric without touching the body. From Cardinal Lobkowitz's report, "He is breathing, but he is not alive. We are sitting by the body, but there is no breath, only movement." One of the monks confessed in confession. "When I leaned toward his ear, he said, 'Don't pray,' but his lips did not move." He was removed from service. By mid-April, a second ulcer appeared at the base of his spine. A creature emerged from it, colorless, about the length of a finger. It crawled across the sheet until it disappeared under the mattress. Dominic's servant, who saw this, burned the bed. He was later found dead. A letter in his room read, "He is not a man, he is a void in which something else lives." The rooms began to be sprinkled with holy water. Ashes were scattered on the floor, and clothes with incense were placed in the windows. It was all in vain. The smell grew stronger. The guards' clothes were changed twice a shift. Those who stood at the doors complained of nosebleeds, weakness, and headaches. At the end of April, Cardinal Melchior left the palace. He wrote, "I saw one of the king's eyes burst, not from pressure, from inside. A thick, cloudy liquid came out of it, and the the other eye looked as if it saw not us, but something behind us. The last change of linen took place in mid-May. The sheets were no longer removed. The fabric stuck to the skin and tore off in pieces. Then they simply covered him with a new layer. Von Klamm wrote, "He is not moving, but something is pulsing in his stomach. It is not breathing. It is life that should not be." By the morning of May 23rd, the king could not be awakened, but his body was still giving off heat. And when the monk leaned over to check his breathing, steam came out of his nostrils. The chamberlain wrote, "We do not know if he is breathing, but it seems he can still hear." The procession prepared to carry him out. The carriage was reinforced with iron brackets. A wax mask was prepared to hide his face. The sheets were burned. A ditch was dug around the palace to bury the rotten remains of the fabric. The lights in the windows remained lit throughout the night. Silent priests sat below. Some sang psalms. Others whispered, "He will not die. He will remain." When May came, the body no longer concealed anything. The bandages no longer held. The fluid oozing from the groin did not dry, but became sticky and foul-smelling, eating away at the tissue and skin beneath. Report from the apothecary de Hill. A second incision has opened below the navel. The tissue is soft, like boiled meat. Inside, there is no blood, but something thick, yellow-brown, and warm. It is moving. The servants entered the chambers, only with rags wrapped around their faces. One of them, a boy of about 16, dropped the tray and ran out. He was later found in the stables, his tongue cut out. Rumor has it that he cut it out himself. A second servant girl fainted. Her clothes were soaked with dark stains that could not be washed out with water or wine. By May, the smell of the king's body could be smelled on the stairs leading to the north wing. Chancellor Suarez wrote in a private note, "I cannot distinguish his breath from the steam rising from the basement. It is thick and heavy. I do not think he is human. I think he is a bag waiting for us to turn away." The doctors continued to observe him. One of them, Juan de Alvarez, tore off his fingernail after bandaging the groin area. Under the nail, he wrote, there was slime and it was moving. The political situation entered a phase of hidden confrontation. The Count of Aranda collected signatures for the immediate recognition of the heir. He was supported by the Archbishop of Seville. At the same time, supporters of the Regency Council, including the Count of Ribera and Doña Jimena, insisted, "The king is alive. He is blessed by his suffering. His decay is a sign of his cross." New guards were posted between the chambers and the chapel. Reports on the condition of the body were no longer released beyond the three: the physician, the valet, and the monk who changed the sheets. The final exacerbation came in the middle of the month. The body temperature fluctuated, but the heat in the groin area persisted. The groin ulcer doubled in size. White, dense rings began to emerge from it, resembling pieces of entrails. They were mobile. When one of them fell to the floor, it left a trail behind it and disappeared under the bed. Dr. von Klamm wrote, "I saw it. It is not an intestine. An intestine has no eyes." The servant Dominic was found dead at the door. His chest was scratched, his fingernails broken. During the autopsy, a clot of whitish mass was found in his stomach, which could not be identified. The chamberlain ordered all the linen in the chambers to be changed, but the new fabric began to decompose by morning. At the same time, one of the chaplains, who had been admitted to give the last rites, fled during the night. A note was found on his bed with the words, "I read over him, but the words would not come. He looked as if there was someone else under his skin. I heard breathing, but it came from his stomach." The military council, convened in the South Gallery, unanimously decided that if the king showed no signs of consciousness by the end of the week, he would be declared incapacitated. But that same evening, his eyes opened. Witnesses claimed that his pupils did not move, but steam came out of his mouth, and one of the candles went out. Soon after, the chambers became covered in black mold. It appeared on the walls, on the floor, on the icons. They tried to scrub it off with salt and solutions, but it kept coming back. The medical council refused to enter without a blessing. One of the servants on night duty later wrote, "He lies there, but it seems that everything in the room is subject to him. Even the wax flows toward his bed." Death came unnoticed. No cry, no moan, no silence. At some point, the flesh stopped breathing, or something else was breathing. The priest who came to give him his last rites could not utter a word. He was led away, trembling. The note the next day read, "He died, or fell into something that cannot be called life." The body couldn't be moved. It had grown together with the bed. The clothes were removed along with the skin. There was a hole in his groin, not a wound, but like an entrance. The doctors suggested temporarily filling it with lime, but it foamed and dissolved. Then they wrapped him in thick cloth, but black streaks seeped through it. The funeral took place without a liturgy. The coffin was lowered at night. The candles would not light. They went out by themselves. According to the official chronicle, he died in peace. He was buried. But private records of courtiers preserved a different account. He rotted away. He disappeared. He flowed from his body into the Power. After Charles's death, Spain entered a year of unrest. An uprising began in Tarragona. Monasteries closed in Toledo. Rumors spread in Castile that the king had risen from the dead and would appear on Corpus Christi. Rome issued a ban on the autopsy of bodies without the Pope's permission. France did not officially recognize the new monarch, and only in one report, attributed to a surviving chaplain, is there a line, "The body is not dead. It simply no longer needs a human being."